We have a wonderful guest speaker today. I'd like to welcome Pastor Dave up. Yeah, Pastor Dave.
No. Blinding lights on both sides, but I can barely see you. I know that you're there. I can hear you. Well, I am delighted to be with you today, and I wish I could speak Korean, English, and Spanish all at one time. But since I can't, I'll do what I can with my limited English to try to share with you something about the Word of God as I have found it in the book of James and in the book of Micah. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the epistle, or the letter of James, which you'll find in our New Testament. There's something very interesting about it to me, and that is that in spite of what I was taught in seminary, it may be a very, very old book. James may have been the brother of Jesus who wrote this. We know that Jesus had 4 brothers. They're all named in the Bible, and at least 2 sisters. And it just says, and his sisters. It's plural, so we know there were at least 2. And it used to be thought that this epistle in James that she read from was very, very late. But now it sounds like it might have been really the brother of Jesus, because he became the leader of the church after Jesus was crucified. He was the head of the council. Peter and Paul came to him in the council to make some decisions about how we should live our Christian life, and how a Jew could become a Christian. So James, the brother of Jesus, was very significant in the beginning. And it seems as though he may have written this book that we heard from. Now, what's so interesting about that is that would make it the earliest writing we would have in the New Testament. So it would be talking about things that the earliest Christians were hearing and their concerns. He wrote this before the Apostle Paul wrote his letters trying to interpret who Jesus was and beliefs about Jesus and things that he said. Or then Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Gospels that tell of the life of Jesus were written 30 years later. So this might have been what were on the minds of people in the earliest days of our Christian church, just immediately after Jesus was no longer with us. But his brother James, as I say, took over, and he wrote some of these very practical things about living the Christian life. Now, we have much on our minds today. If you're watching the news at all, you know that there are things that are happening that simply go contrary to everything we ever believed would happen in this country in terms of violent protests and what have you. This is not what we learned. It's not the way we are, and I hope it's not the way we're going to be. I am glad the event was called off in San Francisco yesterday, and right now in Berkeley and Oakland there are to be other comings together of people, and we hope again that that will be peaceful, because that is our ideal. What we hope to live for is the way of peace, the way that Jesus taught, the loving way. And it's going to be up to people who are people of faith, I think, to keep us on the track that where we respect life, liberty, and people have the pursuit of happiness without fear. That's what we want for everybody, no matter who they are in our country. And John Wesley, who founded our church, the Methodist Church, believed that so much. He said, Christianity is the religion of love. Nothing more, nothing less. And he went on to talk about what he expects of us as Christian people. And he gave a sermon at the very last of his life when a chapel was built and committed to him. And here he was way up in his 80s at this time, 70s or 80s maybe. And he preached a sermon, and part of it went like this. So he began, And I'm going to read it rather dramatically because that's the way he would have preached it. He says, "Are you a witness of the religion of love? Are you really? Are you a lover of God and all humankind? Does your heart glow with gratitude to the giver of every good and perfect gift? Is your soul warm with benevolence for all humankind? Do you love not just in word only, but in deed and in truth? Do you, as you have time, do good unto others, and in as high a degree as you are able? Whosoever thus does the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and my sister and my mother. Whosoever you are, whose heart is herein as my heart, give me your hand. Let us join hearts and hands in this blessed work, in striving to bring glory to God in the highest, and establishing peace and goodwill among all people to the uttermost of our power. Let us influence one another, not to anger and argument, but to love and to good works, always remembering those deep words. God engraved them upon our hearts. God is love, and they who live in love live in God, and God in them." So that's a part of our foundation. Living the love, living the language of love. We can live the language of anger and hostility, or we, each and every one of us here, can live the language of love. So now we come back to James. First of all, James was talking about the things that are negative, that don't fit in with the language of love at all. He mentioned jealousy. Jealousy probably ends relationships rather than creates loving relationships. We've all seen that, haven't we? Where jealousy's got in the way of love. Or bitterness. That's simply not in the vocabulary of love. Bitterness. Selfishness. That's contrary to Jesus' teaching about love, if we're selfish. Boasting, that implies that we're better than the other person if we're boasting about how good we are. Jesus taught humility. So, what we saw in Charlottesville last week fits none of this. It wasn't the language of love that we heard there, it was the language of hate. And here we hear the language of love being spoken. And we hope it's being spoken right now, as I say, in Berkeley and in Oakland. Then James says, no, there is the language that Jesus taught us to speak. And here we have these things. And again, James indicated each one of these as James was talking about what faith really is. It's living the language of love. Martin Luther, incidentally, who founded the Lutheran Church, he hated the book of James. He didn't even want it included in the Bible because he wanted to say faith and faith alone saves us. We don't need anything else. The way you live, that's irrelevant. Faith and faith alone. And John Wesley, our founder, said, no, you show me your faith. And James, the Epistle of James says, you show me your faith by your words, and I will show you my faith by my actions. Live it out. If you don't live it, what's the point of love anyhow? And so here we are finding some of these attributes, and gentleness is one of the first attributes that we see. I heard a story which I want to share with you. I read it. About a man who was just absolutely irate. He ran out of his office. This was in New York, and down into the Central Park, and he was telling children to get out of his way. He bumped into a man who was using a walker. He was hostile with people who were walking by, and this one woman was watching him, and she walked over very slowly right in front of him and looked up and sort of smiled and went over and sat down on a bench. And he was still there waving his hands in anger over something that happened. And finally she looked at him and he looked at her and she said, come over and sit down. And he was sort of surprised, and he was tired by then, so he went over and he sat down next to her. And this woman said softly, "Been a pretty bad day, hasn't it?" And he says, "Yeah," talked about it. And finally, he said something. He was still angry, and then she said, "It really hurts when something bad happens." And he says, "Yeah." And then they talked a little bit more, and finally she said, "And it's hurt you in a very, very bad way to have you respond as you've had to." And he says, "Yeah." And he started to tell her why he was mad, and they talked, and finally she said, "My name's Elizabeth, what's yours?" And he says, "My name's John." And they continued to talk, and she in her soft way, allowing him to unload, and the more he unloaded, the quieter he became. And finally she says, "Well, John, I need to be on my way now." And he says, "Okay, well, thank you for being with me." And they stood up, and he said, "Bye, Elizabeth." And she said, "Peace be with you, John." And he said, well, okay, peace be with you." And they went their ways. Gentleness won over anger. Gentleness won over hostility. They went their way. She was speaking Jesus' language, the language of love, and gentleness is one part of it. Secondly, we have friendliness. And that seems so obvious. You wonder why it's even mentioned in the Bible there, but Jesus thought it was important. At one point, Jesus said to his disciples, they were gathered around him, probably more than just the disciples, more than the 12. He had many other followers with him. And he said, "I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends." So that's how Jesus saw them, and that's how he wanted them to see him. Think of friends you have. Think of friends you had several years ago, maybe back when you were in the earliest years of school. Maybe some are still with you. Thinking of friends that you have as adults, maybe even your parents. That love makes for friendship. Other people you encounter here in your church, friends. One denomination is even called the Friends because it's inherent in Christianity that we would have a friendly relationship with other people, a society of friends. Day before yesterday, I went to San Francisco. I picked up a friend who had been a friend in high school, a Roman Catholic friend who's a retired attorney, and we went from Moraga over to San Francisco. And there we met another fellow who had been in high school with us. He was a big, handsome basketball player, and he and I were not really friends. We were not unfriendly. We would say hello and greet each other, but I really didn't know Bob all that well. I didn't know how I was going to respond to him when I saw him after all these years, and I mean decades. It's been a long, long time since I'd seen him, or him me. And we saw and looked at each other. "Hi, Bob. Hi, Dave." And all of a sudden, we were embracing. We were hugging each other because we had some experiences in common those years back. And they were good experiences. They were positive experiences. And we spent 2 hours, the three of us and his son, just talking about good times and people we've known and what we value. And it turns out I didn't know that Bob is a Mormon. So here we had a Mormon, a Catholic, and a Methodist, Protestant, all together having this great time. I know he's a Mormon. He has 25 grandchildren. I can't keep up with my 4. But at any rate, we affirmed friendship. And it's going to be a lasting one now. It's not just friendliness, which is wonderful to have a friendly relationship, but to be friends, it grows out of friendliness. And I have a friend in Bob, and a friend now, and my friend, the attorney. "I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends." And then Jesus said also that one of the words in the language of love is compassion. And compassion is caring feelings that you live out for someone in need. Caring feelings that you live for someone who has a special need. And I have a feeling that you acted with compassion down in Cuba. There were probably people who were living in ways that you'd never seen before. There are people who had suffered some things that you had never seen before. And there you were with them, not towering above them, you were with them, showing compassion, living the love. And the love that you lived is going to live on. Your compassion registered. It's a part of the language of God. And finally, James says, well, there's another word. It's a part of the language of God, and that's the good deeds that we do. And that's what made Martin Luther mad, that James was talking about the good deeds you do count with God. We have to live out our faith, and that's what we do indeed. And did you have a Stop Hunger Now program here at the church, where you packaged food? Were you a part of that? You did package some food that went overseas with Stop Hunger Now? Okay, that is living it out, where millions and millions of packages of food have been made by people just like us here and sent over to places of great need, basically for children. And all around the world, whether it's India, Africa, wherever, we have sent that because people like you took some time to do a good deed, to show some love, as you went through pouring all that food into little packages and others taking it out and sending on a truck, then went overseas in ships, because you did what God certainly must have wanted you to do. It was a party time. And the service and compassion that you showed, as I say, down in Cuba must register. You were talking the language of love. Now, be sure to hear this. This is so important. Whether we're talking about gentleness, friendliness, compassion, generous deeds, I don't believe that God is up there with a checkbook, or with a book checking off how many good deeds you did, how often you were compassionate, how often you did something that was gentle. Or do I think that you would want to begin each day by saying, well, I think 6 times today I'm going to be gentle, and 3 times today I'm going to be generous, and, well, twice I'll show some compassion. That isn't what we do. And add them up at the end of the day and say, gee, what a good boy am I, what a good girl am I did all those things. We don't set out to speak the language of love intentionally like that. Rather, we live the love, and if we have God's love in our hearts, if we follow Jesus' spirit and teaching, then we will automatically do those things. We don't have to keep count, because they flow from the faith and the love and the hearts that we have. I want to close with another story, if you don't mind. You don't mind stories, do you? Okay. This is the story of a man who got up every morning and he went outside and walked around his block. And this one day he got up and he walked out and he saw a fellow across the way who was putting leaves out in front of his house, stacking them up. He says, "What are you doing that for? You're not supposed to do that until Thursday, and here this is only Tuesday." And he went on to eat the guy out for doing that. And he didn't know that the fellow was going to have heart surgery, and in 3 days they had to go to the hospital tomorrow, which is why he had to put out his leaves. And then he saw this woman with the dog, and he heard the dog at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he told her what he thought about that. Well, what he didn't know was that the dog had chased the skunk out of the neighborhood, but he just still told her that he didn't appreciate what she did at all. Then finally came next door, and here was the fellow who was painting the trim of his house. It was sort of an ugly gray. He said, "What in the world are you doing that for? Here I have my house a nice yellow, and you paint yours gray?" Well, he didn't know that was just the undercoat. But here he was just jumping into all sorts of conclusions, showing his anger. He got back in his house, and he was sitting in the chair, and his wife walked in, and she said, "Well, what's wrong with you?" And he said, "Well, I hate to say this, but I realize if everyone in this block behaved the way I did this morning, I wouldn't want to live here." All of a sudden he realized that he hadn't been living the language of love. And that's our choice, any day of our life, to live those things that are a part of the language of love. And we don't do it to check him off. We do it because Jesus is in our heart, and that's what God likes. Jesus' brother James said so.
Thank you, Pastor, for such a wonderful message.